Ave Imperator. I have served aboard the Emperor-class battleship Eternal Vigilance for 37 years. I have witnessed warp storms tear reality apart around us. I have seen crew members go mad and murder their bunkmates. I have watched children born in the lower decks who will die having never seen daylight, never touched soil, never known anything except the endless corridors of this flying tomb. There are 47,000 souls aboard this vessel. Most will never leave. Most will die here, their bodies recycled into the ship systems, their names forgotten within a generation. This is life aboard an Imperial Navy warship, and it is nothing like the propaganda holovids. Ave Imperator. I am scribe documentarian Malachi Thorne, assigned to the Eternal Vigilance by the Administratum to maintain crew records, log daily operations, and document the human experience of void warfare for posterity. For 37 years, I have walked these corridors. I have descended into the bowels of this vessel where the light of the Emperor's grace barely reaches. I have climbed to the command decks where officers make decisions that determine the fate of millions. I have witnessed every aspect of life aboard an Imperial Navy warship. And what I have learned is this: these ships are not merely weapons. They are cities. Self-contained civilizations housing populations larger than many planetary settlements, existing in the absolute void between stars, governed by hierarchies more rigid than any feudal world. The Eternal Vigilance is 6 kilometers long, 6 kilometers of adamantium, steel, and sanctified machinery. It masses approximately 30 million tons. Its void shields could protect a small continent. Its weapons batteries could reduce a hive city to rubble in minutes. But these statistics do not convey what it means to live here. To truly understand life aboard a warship, you must understand the layers, both physical and social, that divide this floating city. Let me take you on a journey from the deepest bilges to the highest command decks. Let me show you what the Administratum does not want documented. The BILGES, or Humanity DGRADS. The lowest levels of the Eternal Vigilance, decks 97 through 112, are officially designated Engineering Support Infrastructure. Unofficially, the crew calls them the bilges, or sometimes the hells. I descended there for the first time in my 3rd year aboard. My guide was Chief Rating Varro, a man who had served in the bilges for 42 years, and whose skin had taken on a grayish pallor from never seeing natural light. "Scribe," he warned me as we climbed down the access ladder, "the bilges aren't like the upper decks. Down here, Imperial law is negotiable. The officers never come this deep. Nobody cares what happens here as long as the machinery keeps running." The air changed as we descended. The recycled atmosphere of the upper decks gave way to something thick, humid, oppressive. It tasted of machine oil, human sweat, and something else, something organic and rotting that I could not identify. The bilges are a maze of coolant pipes, waste recycling systems, and power conduits. The ceiling is so low in places that adults must crouch. The lighting is minimal, occasional flickering lumens casting more shadow than illumination. The noise is constant, a grinding, clanking, hissing symphony of machinery that never stops. And living in this environment, I found approximately 8,000 human beings. They were not official crew. Most had no designation in the ship's records. They were the descendants of ratings who had served generations ago, born in the bilges, raised in the bilges, never having seen anything else. They survived by performing maintenance tasks too dangerous or degrading for official crew, cleaning toxic coolant spills, crawling through waste reclamation tubes, manually operating backup systems that should have been automated centuries ago. I met a child there. Couldn't have been older than 8 standard years. Her name was Mila, though she couldn't spell it because she had never been taught to read. She had been born in Junction 97 Beta, had lived her entire life within a 300-meter radius, and believed the ship was the entire universe. "Is there really an outside?" she asked me, her eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. "The old ones say there are worlds out there with sky and dirt and things that grow, but that's just stories, right? For children." I told her it was real, that beyond the hull there were planets with open sky and growing things, that people lived on solid ground, not steel decks. She didn't believe me. In her experience, reality was metal walls, recycled air, and the constant drone of machinery. Anything else was fairy tale. This is what the Administratum doesn't document. There are thousands of souls aboard Imperial Navy warships who are born, live, and die never knowing anything except the ship. They are not officially crew. They are not recorded in any manifest. They simply exist, generation after generation, in the deepest, darkest parts of these vessels. When I asked Chief Varro about them, his response was pragmatic. "They're useful, scribe. They maintain systems that would otherwise fail. They keep the ship running. And when they die from accidents, from exposure to toxins, from simple exhaustion, there are always more to replace them. It's efficient." Efficient, that word haunts me still. The lower decks, the working masses. Above the bilges, spanning decks 60 through 96, are the lower crew quarters. This is where the majority of the ship's official crew lives, approximately 35,000 ratings, menials, and junior personnel. I lived among them for my first 15 years aboard. My quarters were a bunk in dormitory 73 Gamma, a space designed for 50 crew members but housing 82. Each person had a sleeping platform exactly 1 meter wide and 2 meters long. Personal possessions were limited to what could fit in a single footlocker. Privacy did not exist. We slept, ate, and lived in constant proximity to dozens of others. The noise never stopped, snoring, crying, arguing, coupling, dying. All of it echoed through the dormitory at all hours. The daily routine was rigid. 400 hours, wake alarm. The entire dormitory roused simultaneously by klaxons loud enough to make ears ring. 410 hours, personal hygiene. 42 minutes to wash, dress, and prepare for duty. The ablutions chamber had 12 shower stalls for 82 people. Most of us learned to wash in under 3 minutes. 500 hours, morning prayers. Mandatory attendance in the nearest chapel. We recited catechisms praising the emperor, the ship, and the officers who commanded us. Absence was punished by reduction in rations. 530 hours, breakfast. Reconstituted protein paste, carbohydrate slurry, and vitamin-fortified water. It tasted like salted cardboard, but it provided adequate nutrition for a 12-hour work shift. 600 hours, duty shift begins. For me, this meant 14 hours in the Administratum offices, processing crew reports, updating records, filing documentation. For others, it meant working the gun decks, maintaining plasma reactors, or scrubbing waste reclamation systems. 2,000 hours, duty shift ends, return to dormitory. 20-30 hours, evening meal. Same as breakfast, but sometimes with a small portion of reconstituted vegetables. 2100 hours, free time. 3 hours to ourselves before sleep cycle. Most spent this time sleeping because exhaustion was constant. Others gambled, told stories, or participated in underground activities the officers pretended not to notice. 2400 hours, sleep cycle. 8 hours until the wake alarm started it all again. This schedule continued every single day without variation for years, decades, entire lifetimes. The only breaks were holy days, approximately 40 per standard year, when work shifts were reduced to 8 hours and we received double rations. These were celebrated with desperate, manic joy because they represented the only respite from the grinding monotony. But what truly defined life on the lower decks was not the routine, it was the hierarchy. Every person knew their place with absolute certainty. You deferred to anyone of higher rank. You addressed officers with ritualistic formality. You never questioned orders, never complained about conditions, never suggested that things could be different. Because the alternative to this life was worse. Demotion to the bilges, or in extreme cases, spacing, being ejected through an airlock into the void as punishment for serious infractions. I witnessed a spacing once. A rating named Valen had been caught stealing rations, not for himself, but for his sick daughter who wasn't receiving adequate medical care. The punishment was absolute. He was marched to airlock 47 Delta, given 30 seconds to recite his prayers to the Emperor, and then expelled into vacuum. The entire deck crew was required to watch via pict feed, a lesson, a reminder. This is what happens when you violate the ship's order. The middle decks, the machinery of operations. Decks 30 through 59 house the operational heart of the ship. This is where the real work happened. The gun decks, the engineering sections, the command relays that made the eternal vigilance function as a weapon. I spent considerable time documenting operations on gun deck 23 Tertius. A single gun deck on an Emperor-class battleship houses 8 macro cannon batteries, each weapon longer than a hab block, and requiring a crew of 170 personnel to operate. The work was brutal. Loading a macro cannon shell, each one massing 40 tons, required teams of 50 men operating hand-cranked pulleys because the automated systems had failed generations ago, and replacement parts had never arrived. Firing the cannon generated recoil so violent that crew members needed to be strapped into shock harnesses or risk being thrown across the deck. I interviewed Master Gunner Thaddeus, who had served on gun deck 23 for 34 years. "Scribe, you want to know what it's like? I'll tell you, it's hell. The heat from the cannon barrels when we're in sustained bombardment reaches temperatures that make metal glow. Men pass out from heat exhaustion. Sometimes they fall into the loading mechanisms and get crushed before anyone can stop the cycle. We lose approximately 3 crew per engagement, sometimes more if we're fighting hard. The bodies get recycled. There's no room to store corpses on a warship. Their protein goes into the food synthesizers. Their bones get ground up for fertilizer in the hydroponics bays. And we keep fighting, because that's what we do, that's what the ship needs." The engineering sections were even more dangerous. The plasma reactors that powered the eternal vigilance operated at temperatures that would vaporize unprotected human flesh instantly. Radiation leaks were common. I reviewed medical records showing that 70% of engineering crew developed some form of cancer by their 40th year of service. But they continued serving, because the ship needed power, because the reactors must never fail, because individual lives were expendable if it meant keeping the vessel operational. The upper decks, the officer class. Decks 1 through 29 were officer country. This is where I witnessed the true divide aboard the Eternal Vigilance. The difference was immediately apparent. The corridors were wider, better lit, actually decorated with tapestries and devotional artwork. The air smelled of incense instead of machine oil. The temperature was comfortable rather than oppressively hot or freezing cold. Officers lived in private quarters, actual rooms with doors that locked. Junior officers shared spaces, yes, but 2 or 3 to a room rather than 80 to a dormitory. Senior officers had suites that would shame noble estates on some worlds. I was granted access to the officers' mess hall on Deck 7 to document dining procedures. What I witnessed was shocking in its disparity. While lower deck crew ate protein paste from metal bowls while standing or squatting in cramped mess halls, officers dined at tables set with actual cloth. They ate real food, reconstituted, yes, but prepared to resemble actual meals. Meat analog fashioned to look like roast fowl. Vegetable paste sculpted into forms reminiscent of greens and tubers. And they had alcohol. Actual, genuine alcohol, distilled aboard ship in quantities that would represent months of water rations for lower deck crew. Captain Xerxes Brant, master of the Eternal Vigilance, invited me to dine with him once. I will never forget that meal, not because the food was exceptional, it was merely adequate, but because of what he said. Scribe Thorne, you maintain the crew records. You have seen the mortality rates in the lower decks, yes. The accidents, the diseases, the violence. I confirmed that I had. And you wonder, perhaps, why we officers enjoy these small comforts while the crew suffers. I did not answer, but my expression must have confirmed his suspicion. It is because we bear the burden of command. We make the decisions that send men to their deaths. We carry the weight of 47,000 souls depending on our judgment. These small comforts, the private quarters, the better food, they are not luxuries. They are necessities. They maintain the psychological distance required to command effectively. If I lived as the crew lives, if I ate as they eat, if I suffered as they suffer, I would be unable to order them into situations where they will die. I would hesitate, and hesitation in void warfare means the destruction of the entire ship. So I accept these comforts not because I deserve them, but because the ship requires me to be separate, to be other, to be able to make the cruel calculations that keep us alive. I understood his logic. I even accepted its necessity, but it did not make the disparity less disturbing. Fellow citizens, the most terrifying aspect of life aboard a warship is not the danger, the hierarchy, or the brutal working conditions. It is the warp transit. The Eternal Vigilance spends approximately 40% of its operational time in the warp, that hellish dimension where the laws of physics do not apply, where demons swim in seas of chaos, where human sanity fractures like glass. I have experienced 17 warp transits in my 37 years aboard. Each one has taken something from me. I no longer dream in any conventional sense. My sleep is filled with visions I cannot properly describe, geometries that should not exist, colors that have no names, sounds that seem to come from inside my own skull. But I am fortunate. I serve on the upper decks where the Gellar field is strongest, where reality maintains the most coherent grip. In the lower decks, where the field's protection is weakest, warp transit is hell incarnate. During my 5th year aboard, we underwent an extended warp transit, 17 weeks subjective time, traveling from the Gothic sector to the Halo stars. I descended to the lower decks on day 43 of the transit to document crew conditions. What I found defied sanity. The Gellar field, which protects the ship from warp incursion, is not uniformly strong. In the deepest sections of the lower decks, reality becomes soft, negotiable, wrong. I witnessed a rating named Marius standing in corridor 84 Beta, having a conversation with someone who was not there. Not simply talking to empty air, but gesturing, laughing, responding to statements I could not hear. When I approached him, he looked at me with eyes that held too many pupils and asked, "Can you see him too?" "My brother. He's been dead for 20 years, but he says he's always been here, watching from the other side of the walls." I reported this to the deck's medici servitor. The servitor scanned Marius, detected warp taint, and ordered immediate quarantine. Marius was taken to the isolation cells, where he would remain for the duration of the transit. When I checked the records 2 weeks later, Marius was listed as recycled for protein. Warp-touched crew cannot be returned to duty. The risk of contamination spreading is too great. The solution is always the same: termination and biomass reclamation. But individual cases of warp touch are manageable. What truly terrified me was the collective madness. On day 61 of that transit, an entire dormitory, 73 crew members, began exhibiting synchronized behavior. They moved in perfect unison, spoke in perfect harmony, and when one was injured, the others screamed as if they too had been hurt. The ship's chaplain investigated. He declared it a minor warp incursion, nothing that threatened the ship's integrity but dangerous enough to require action. The entire dormitory was sealed, atmosphere vented, and later that week, 73 bodies were processed through the recyclers. The official logs recorded it as environmental malfunction, catastrophic decompression, 73 casualties. No mention of warp touch. No acknowledgement of what had actually happened. Because acknowledging it would mean admitting that despite our Gellar fields, despite our prayers, despite our faith in the Emperor's protection, we are never truly safe in the warp. The MUTANTS, humanity's gradual corruption. Another truth the administratum suppresses. Long-term void service causes mutations. Exposure to warp radiation, even filtered through Gellar fields, has cumulative effects. Combine that with recycled gene material, food synthesizers using human remains, constant low-level toxin exposure, and cramped conditions that prevent proper immune system function, and mutations become inevitable. I have documented 743 cases of physical mutation among the crew of the Eternal Vigilance. These range from minor extra digits, miscolored eyes, vestigial growths, to severe, additional limbs, radical bone deformations, organs growing in wrong locations. The official policy is termination and recycling. Mutants are abominations. They represent genetic corruption. They cannot be tolerated. But in practice, enforcement is inconsistent. Minor mutations in lower deck crew are often ignored if the individual remains functional. They continue working, continue serving, their deformities hidden beneath clothing or explained away as industrial accidents. I met a woman named Setha who had 3 arms, a fully functional third limb growing from her left shoulder. She had served in the cargo holds for 22 years, her mutation unreported because her extra arm made her exceptionally efficient at loading operations. "I know I should report myself," she told me quietly. "I know what the ecclesiarchy says about mutants, but if I report, I die. If I hide, I live and serve, so I hide." She was eventually discovered during a random inspection. The punishment was immediate execution. But before her death, she said something that haunts me. "I served the Emperor faithfully for 22 years. I never complained, never failed in my duties, never gave less than my absolute best. And my reward is a bullet in the head for a mutation I did not choose and could not prevent. This is the Imperium's justice." The officer who executed her filed his report without emotion. Mutant terminated. Genetic corruption prevented from spreading. Hull integrity maintained. Hull integrity. As if she had been a mechanical fault rather than a living human being who had given decades to faithful service. The children, born into servitude. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of warship life is the children. Imperial Navy vessels on extended deployment, sometimes spending decades or even centuries away from port, develop self-sustaining populations. Crew members form relationships. Those relationships produce offspring, and those offspring become the next generation of crew. I have documented the lives of children born aboard the Eternal Vigilance. Their existence follows a depressingly predictable pattern. Age 05. Raised in communal nurseries by servitors and elderly crew no longer fit for duty. These nurseries are overcrowded, understaffed, and minimally supplied. Infant mortality is approximately 40%. Disease, accidents, and simple neglect claim hundreds of children before they reach their 6th year. Age 6-12. Basic education. They learn to read barely, to perform simple mathematics, to recite imperial catechisms, and to follow orders without question. Physical conditioning begins. They are being prepared for a lifetime of manual labor. Age 13-16. Apprenticeship. Children are assigned to specific decks and trained in whatever function that deck requires. Gun deck children learn to load cannons. Engineering deck children learn to repair plasma conduits. Medical deck children learn basic trauma care. Age 17, official induction into ship's crew. They take the oath of service, pledging their lives to the Emperor, the Navy, and the eternal vigilance. From this day forward, they are full crew members, subject to all duties and all punishments. Age 1860, service. They work, they age, they die. Most never leave the ship, most never see a planet. Most die having spent their entire existence within the same few decks they were born in. I documented the life of a boy named Jace. Born in lower deck dormitory 81 Alpha, raised in nursery 81-3, educated in chapel school 81 primary, apprenticed to gun deck 22 Tertius at age 13, inducted as full crew at 17. At age 23, during a battle against an orc raider fleet, Jace was killed when a macro cannon loading mechanism malfunctioned and crushed him. His body was recycled. His name was added to the casualty list. His bunk was assigned to someone else within hours. He had lived 23 years, every single day aboard the Eternal Vigilance. He had never set foot on solid ground, never seen a sunrise or sunset, never experienced anything the propaganda holovids promised when they showed proud naval service. And there are thousands like him. Entire generations born, serving, and dying aboard these vessels, their lives constrained by hull plates and duty schedules, never knowing that existence could be anything different. The violence, unspoken and ignored. Life aboard a warship breeds violence. 47,000 humans crammed into confined spaces, subjected to constant stress, denied privacy or personal autonomy, violence becomes inevitable. Official statistics report approximately 30 disciplinary incidents per month aboard the Eternal Vigilance. These are the documented cases, fights that resulted in serious injury, thefts that could not be ignored, violations of ship's code that required formal punishment. The reality is far worse. I estimate the actual number of violent incidents to be closer to 300 per month. Most go unreported because reporting means investigation, and investigation disrupts work schedules. Lower deck crew have learned to handle their own problems. I witnessed a beating in dormitory 73 Gamma. A rating named Keller had been accused of stealing another man's ration allotment. 5 crew members cornered him in the ablutions chamber and beat him unconscious with metal pipes. When I attempted to report this to the deck officer, I was advised, "Scribe Thorn, such matters are best handled internally. Unless there is a fatality, we do not intervene in lower deck disputes." Keller survived the beating but suffered permanent damage to his left arm. He was reassigned to less physically demanding duties, and the matter was closed. Sexual violence is even more prevalent and even less reported. Women comprise approximately 30% of the crew. They are subjected to constant harassment and frequent assault. The official channels for reporting such crimes are bureaucratic, slow, and often result in the victim being transferred or demoted rather than the perpetrator being punished. I documented one case where a female rating reported being assaulted by her superior officer. The investigation concluded that insufficient evidence existed to support the claim. The officer continued his duties. The rating was transferred to the bilges for making false accusations against a superior. 3 months later, she died in a coolant accident. The official report listed it as industrial mishap, negligent safety protocols. But the crew who worked with her told me a different story. She had taken her own life, unable to endure the transfer and the knowledge that her attacker faced no consequences. These stories do not appear in official records. They are not documented in the administratum's reports to Terra. They simply happen, over and over, accepted as inevitable consequences of cramming humanity into metal boxes and expecting them to function as efficient machines. The faith, desperation disguised as devotion. Religion aboard the Eternal Vigilance is not the gentle faith you might find in a cathedral on some peaceful agri-world. It is desperate, manic, sometimes bordering on the hysterical. Every deck has at least one chapel. These range from grand spaces on the officer decks, with stained glass, golden aquilas and servoskulls chanting litanies, to tiny alcoves in the lower decks containing nothing but a crude painting of the Emperor and a donation box for offerings. Attendance at prayer services is mandatory. Missing service without valid excuse results in punishment ranging from reduced rations to physical discipline. But most crew attend willingly, desperately, because faith is the only thing that makes existence bearable. I have listened to thousands of prayers whispered in these chapels. They are not prayers of thanksgiving or celebration. They are prayers of desperation. Emperor, let me survive another day. Emperor, let the ship reach port before I die. Emperor, let my child be born healthy and not mutated. Emperor, grant me a quick death when my time comes. The ship's chaplain militant, Father Mordecai, conducts services in the main chapel on Deck 4. His sermons are masterpieces of manipulation, promising rewards in the afterlife for suffering endured in this life, threatening damnation for those who question or complain, assuring the crew that their pain has meaning in the Emperor's grand design. I interviewed Father Mordecai privately, seeking to understand his perspective. Scribe Thorn, he said, these people need faith because they have nothing else. Take away their belief that this suffering serves a higher purpose, and what remains? Despair, rebellion, chaos. So yes, I tell them that the Emperor watches their service, that every moment of pain earns them grace, that their sacrifice matters. Perhaps it is manipulation, but it is necessary manipulation. It keeps them functioning. It keeps the ship operational. And if I must lie to achieve that, well, I pray the Emperor forgives me for my necessary sins. In my 23rd year aboard the Eternal Vigilance, we received orders to engage an Orc raider fleet that had emerged from the warp near the Ghidorah system. I had witnessed combat alerts before, but never a full-scale fleet engagement. What I documented in those hours revealed truths about naval warfare the propaganda carefully omits. The battle alert sounded at 3:47 hours. Klaxons screamed through every deck simultaneously. The Vox system broadcast in a voice devoid of emotion. All hands to battle stations. Repeat, all hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. The transformation was immediate. Every crew member, regardless of their normal duties, had a designated battle station. Mine was in the administratum offices on Deck 11, where I would record casualty reports and coordinate damage control responses. But before reporting to my station, I descended to gun Deck 23 to document crew preparation. What I witnessed was organized chaos. 740 personnel scrambling to their positions, strapping themselves into shock harnesses, loading the first macro cannon shells into firing chambers. The deck officer, Lieutenant Commander Various, stood on an observation platform and issued orders through a personal Vox unit. The gun deck crew moved with practiced efficiency born from thousands of drills. They had done this so many times that muscle memory guided them even as fear twisted their faces. I spoke briefly with Master Gunner Thaddeus. Scribe, if you're staying to document this, you'd better strap in. When we start firing, the recoil will knock you across the deck if you're not secured. I took his advice. I secured myself to a support column with maglocks and prepared my recording equipment. The opening salvo, reality of void warfare. The enemy fleet consisted of 17 Orc vessels, crude, brutal constructions that defied every principle of proper ship design, yet somehow remained functional through sheer Orcish will. The Eternal Vigilance and 5 sister ships moved to intercept. The battle began at extreme range, 30,000 kilometers, when our long-range lance batteries opened fire. From gun deck 23, I could not see the enemy. I could only see the fury of our own weapons and feel the consequences. The first macro cannon firing was catastrophic. The sound was beyond description, not a bang or boom, but a fundamental violence done to reality itself. The deck lurched as recoil transferred through the ship's superstructure. Crew members screamed as shock harnesses cut into their flesh. Then the loading cycle began. 50 men hauling on manual pulleys, dragging a 40-ton shell from the magazine to the loading chamber. The heat from the recently fired cannon was intense enough that 2 crew members collapsed from heat stroke. They were dragged aside and replaced without pause. The loading must continue. 37 seconds from firing to reload. Then the cannon fired again, and again, and again. After the 5th firing, I witnessed the first casualty. A rating named Pels lost his grip on his safety harness during recoil. He was thrown 15 meters across the deck and struck a support column with enough force to shatter his spine. He died screaming while the gun crew stepped over his body to continue loading. There was no time to mourn, no time to process. The battle continued. The CASULTIS, the price of victory. Over the next 7 hours, the Eternal Vigilance engaged in sustained combat. We fired over 4,000 macro cannon shells. We took 17 direct hits from Orc batteries. We suffered catastrophic damage to decks 73 through 81 when an Orc missile penetrated our void shields. I documented the casualty reports as they arrived. Hour 1, 13 dead, 47 injured. Gun deck 23 suffered the deaths of 3 crew during loading operations. Hour 2, 29 dead, 94 injured. Engineering reports critical radiation leak in reactor core 4 beta. Sealing section. 87 crew trapped inside. Radiation exposure fatal within minutes. Hour 3, 106 dead, 218 injured. Orc missile impact on deck 7381. Entire section decompressed. Estimated casualties, 1,847 crew. Hour 4, 273 dead, counting only confirmed fatalities, 409 injured. Medical facilities overwhelmed, treating only those likely to survive, others left to die. Hour 5, 412 dead, 631 injured. Fire and munition storage threatens catastrophic detonation. Damage control teams attempting to vent affected compartments. 17 volunteers sealed themselves in compartment to manually operate venting systems. All 17 dead from flames or asphyxiation. Hour 6, 896 dead, 1,047 injured. Casualty processing overwhelmed. Beginning immediate recycling of corpses to clear medical facilities. Hour 7, 1,217 dead, 2,344 injured. Victory declared. Enemy fleet destroyed. Eternal Vigilance survives with catastrophic damage to multiple decks. Final casualty count, 3,421 dead, 4,782 injured, 2,190 of whom would die from their injuries within the next week. 8,203 lives destroyed in 7 hours of combat, approximately 17% of the ship's total crew. The official report submitted to the Admiralty described it as a decisive victory with acceptable losses. The aftermath, where HEROES become meat. What happened after the battle revealed truths more disturbing than the combat itself. The dead were processed through the recycling system within 24 hours. Bodies were stripped of usable equipment, tagged for record purposes, then fed into biomatter processors that broke them down into component materials. Protein went to food synthesizers. Bone calcium went to hydroponics fertilizer. Metals from augmetics and implants went to engineering stores. Nothing was wasted. Within 3 days, the crew was eating rations that contained the processed remains of their fallen comrades. Nobody spoke of this. Nobody acknowledged it, but everyone knew. The wounded filled every available medical facility. Medici servitors worked around the clock, performing triage with cold efficiency. Those likely to recover received treatment. Those unlikely to survive were given minimal pain relief and left to die. I witnessed a young woman, barely 20 years old, lying on a medical slab with her entire lower body crushed by falling debris. The Medici servitor scanned her, calculated her survival odds at less than 5%, and moved on without offering treatment. She died alone 6 hours later, in a corridor converted to overflow medical space, surrounded by dozens of other dying crew members. Her name was never added to the rolls of honor. She was simply another statistic in the casualty reports. The survivors returned to duty within days. There was no counseling, no psychological support, no acknowledgement of trauma. Damaged crew members who could still function were expected to function. Those who couldn't were reassigned to less demanding duties or, in extreme cases, lobotomized and converted into servitors. I documented the case of Raiding Marin, who suffered severe psychological breakdown after watching his entire gun crew die around him. He became unable to perform his duties, would break down weeping at random times, suffered from severe insomnia and hallucinations. The ship's medici determined he was psychologically compromised beyond recovery. He was transferred to the servitor conversion facilities. His brain was partially lobotomized, his body augmented with cybernetics, and he was reprogrammed to perform simple maintenance tasks. 3 weeks after the battle that broke his mind, I encountered him in Corridor 45 Delta. He was cleaning the floor with mechanical precision, his eyes vacant, a servoskull directing his movements. He no longer remembered his name, his friends, or the trauma that had destroyed him. The ship had converted its broken warrior into a useful tool, efficient, practical, monstrous. The repair, weeks of grinding labor. Repairing the eternal vigilance required 3 months of intensive labor. We could not return to port. The nearest Imperial dockyards were weeks away, and the sector required our presence. So we conducted field repairs, using whatever materials we could salvage, manufacture, or improvise. Decks 7381, which had suffered catastrophic decompression, were sealed permanently. The 847 bodies trapped there were left in place. No recovery was attempted. Those decks became tomb sections, their corridors filled with frozen corpses drifting in zero gravity, their airlocks welded shut. Sometimes at night, crew members claimed to hear sounds from those sealed decks. Banging, screaming, sounds that should not exist in vacuum. The chaplains declare it imagination born from trauma, but the sounds continue. The ruptured hull sections were patched with whatever materials engineering could fabricate, mostly scrap metal cut from less critical areas and welded into place. These patches were crude, ugly, barely functional, but they held. The damaged reactor was brought back online at 60% capacity. The remaining 30% was lost to radiation damage that could only be repaired in proper dockyard facilities. The ship would operate at reduced power until we could reach port, possibly years in the future. And the crew worked. 16-hour shifts 7 days a week for 3 months. Exhaustion became the normal state. Injuries multiplied as tired workers made mistakes. More deaths, more recycling, more names added to the ever-growing casualty lists. When repairs were finally deemed adequate for continued operations, we had lost an additional 273 crew members to accidents and overwork. Total price of the battle, 8,673 lives, nearly 20% of our total complement. The official after-action report praised the crew's exceptional dedication and efficient damage control procedures. The truth I must preserve. Fellow citizens, I have now served aboard the Eternal Vigilance for 37 years, 3 months, and 17 days. I have documented everything I have witnessed in exhaustive detail. But recently, I received orders from the Administratum. My documentation is to be edited before transmission to Terra. All references to conditions in the bilges must be removed. All mentions of mutations, violence, and despair must be sanitized. The final report must present life aboard Imperial Navy warships as difficult but honorable, challenging but rewarding. I am to lie, officially, systematically, to ensure that the truth I have witnessed is buried beneath propaganda. I cannot comply, will not comply. So I have taken precautions. I have created hidden copies of my complete, unedited documentation. I have encoded them in formats designed to survive for centuries. I have secreted them in locations throughout the ship where they might eventually be discovered by someone with the courage to reveal them. This testimony you are reading is one of those hidden copies. This is life aboard an Imperial Navy warship, not the propaganda, not the recruitment holovids showing brave warriors defending humanity among the stars. This is the reality, 47,000 souls trapped in a flying tomb, divided by rigid hierarchy, subjected to brutal labor, dying by the thousands in battles that earn them nothing but more battles. Children born into servitude who will die having never seen sky. Mutations hidden because acknowledging them means death. Violence ignored because efficiency matters more than justice. Faith twisted into a tool of control. And when they die, whether from battle, accident, disease, or simple exhaustion, their bodies are recycled into protein paste that feeds the survivors. Nothing is wasted. Everyone is replaceable. The ship continues. I do not write this to encourage rebellion. The Imperial Navy is necessary. These ships protect humanity from threats we cannot imagine. The officers who command them make decisions I could never make, bearing burdens I could never carry. But the crew, the 47,000 forgotten souls who keep these vessels operational, they deserve to have their truth known. They are not heroes in the way the propaganda presents. They are not willing martyrs joyfully sacrificing themselves for the Emperor's glory. They are human beings trapped in a system that grinds them into component materials, that values them only for their utility, that discards them the moment they cease being useful. And yet they serve, because they have no choice, because this is the only life they know, because the alternative, rebellion, refusing orders, attempting to escape, is death, and a death that will be crueler than any they might suffer in service. To whoever discovers this testimony, I am scribe documentarian Malachi Thorne of the Emperor-class battleship Eternal Vigilance. For 37 years, I have recorded the unfiltered truth of life aboard this vessel. What you have read is not hyperbole. It is not exaggeration. Every incident I described happened exactly as documented. The names are real. The numbers are accurate. The horror is absolute. If you have power, if you have authority, consider what these revelations mean. Consider whether a civilization that treats its own defenders with such casual cruelty deserves the loyalty it demands. Consider whether necessary evil is simply evil we have grown comfortable with. And if you have no power, if you are merely another forgotten soul trapped in the Imperium's endless machinery, know that you are not alone. Know that your suffering has been witnessed and recorded. Know that someone, somewhere, understood what you endured. Ave Imperator, Gloria in excelsis terra. And may the Emperor grant mercy to the 47,000 souls aboard the Eternal Vigilance, since the Imperium grants them none. Classified documentation, life aboard Imperial Navy vessels. Scribe documentarian Malachi Thorne, Adeptus Administratum. Record sealed and hidden, 847 M41. They are not heroes, they are prisoners. They do not serve by choice. They serve because they have no alternative. and their sacrifice is real, even if it is never acknowledged.